today's agenda is sort of threefold. So first, I'm going to talk about what is early warning score. Now, this is for the small percentage who are actually completely new. And also for us, it is useful to always go and revise what we already know about. And then what are the modifications of the early warning score that are currently being practiced? And specifically, I'll talk about the National Early Warning Score in the UK, because that's what we have implemented in our hospital. And then we also talk about how to implement it and what are the lessons we learned while we implemented it. If time permits, we can have some discussions and question answers at the end. So early warning score, I'll talk about what is it, how is it better than the temperature, pulse, respiration, TPR chart, which traditionally we use, and how does it work? And finally, what are the benefits and disadvantages? This is what we talk about early warning score in the beginning. And so EWS, as you all know, is an acronym for early warning score, and it is used by mainly the nurses, and the doctors also help in using this early warning score. So it is based on these vital signs, the respiratory rate, oxygen saturation, temperature, pulse, blood pressure, or and heart rate or pulse rate, and the level of consciousness. So the level of consciousness is simple, alert, responding to verbal, responding to pain, unresponsive scale. Now we don't use the Glasgow Coma scale. It's a very simple assessment of the level of consciousness. And there are different clinical settings where early warning score are used. Pre-hospital, it can be used in the field to triage the sick patients, and it is used in the emergency department again to triage the patients who are coming to the hospital. Can be used in the general surgical ward, ICU, or in any of the general wards. So these are the classical places where the early warning score is used. And what about the rest of the world? It seems that it is being implemented in at least 34 countries along 6 continents. India is also one of the countries where it is used. But the implementation varies from country to country because it depends on the availability of resources, organizational culture, clinical practices, and the local policies and regulations. So you can't say it is fairly uniform, but then we really don't have data whether it is really standardized in all the countries. So whatever studies are done have shown there are quite a lot of variations in how the early warning score is used. So when you talk about early warning, what is it warning us about? So we keep talking about early warning score, early warning score. So what is this early warning about? That's something first we have to understand. And what it warns us is the worsening of the clinical condition of the patient. So what happens now is we only react after a patient has had a cardiac arrest. So it's a reactive approach now we have. Whereas early warning score is a proactive approach where before the cardiac arrest happens or before the patient crashes, whether it's cardiac, respiratory, or whatever. So before the patient arrests, it will tell us about the worsening of the clinical condition. So that is what the early warning score is all about. So it will tell us about, inform us early about the worsening of the clinical condition of the patient. So there may be some who think, what is this guy talking about this EWS? We have been using the TPR chart for so many years, and it has served us like anything. So is it, early warning score just a glorified TPR chart? So here is a classical TPR chart we all been using. So where we can track temperature, mainly, I think it was used when there was a lot of fever cases, and the 2/3 of the chart is occupied with the temperature chart. And then below you can see, you can have the pulse rate and the other things here: pulse rate, respiration, blood pressure, urine, bowel movement, intake, output, diet, and whether the patient had bath. So this varies from hospital to hospital. Some hospital may have this or may not have this. Some may have additional things. It all, it's not standardized at all. So this is about the TPR chart. So the primary function of a temperature, pulse, respiratory chart is an observation chart. The nurse observes it and notes it down, And it is up to the doctor who come on rounds and see this chart to take the decisions. So that is how the TPR chart has been used. So it's basically an observation chart. Whereas the MEWS chart, as you can see, it's a very colorful chart. It is a response to observation. So we make that jump, we empower the nurses so that they can respond to the observation. So that is the, I feel, as far as I'm concerned, the fundamental difference between the traditional TPR chart and the MEWS chart, where we can use this chart to respond to the observation, whereas TPR is just observing. We don't do anything about it. So if you really look at the difference, the traditional chart is a subjective assessment, and okay, whereas early warning systems have an objective scoring system. The frequency is fixed. Now, if you tell the order that it has to be a 4th hourly, a 2nd hourly, it will be fixed till you do the next morning rounds. Whereas here, you can adjust it according to the risk level of the patients, the frequency of monitoring I'm talking about. Then the detection of clinical worsening, it highlights only gross changes. Sometimes the nurses help us by putting red ink in that. Whereas here, subtle or gradual changes can be detected in early warning system. And the response is based on interpretation of each individual parameter. Now we look at temperature, pulse, respiration, all in separate silos. Whereas here, it has a composite score, and the overall trend of deterioration is visible, not just individual parameters. So that's the basic difference between early warning score and the traditional TPR chart. So how does early warning score work? So like in an observation chart, the nurse first observes the vital signs and they record it. But the early warning score helps us to compare this against the normal range and produce a score. So that is the first step. Second, it generates a score by comparing the whatever is being measured against the normal range, and it gives individual score for each parameter and total score for all the parameters together. So the second thing is generates a score. The third, it identifies the risk. I'll talk a little bit about it in later. So based on the score, it identifies 4 levels of risk, and finally, based on the risk, it triggers a response. So the response can be an immediate response, or you don't do anything about it. Now patient is stable, and so we continue monitoring. So there is a graded response based on the early warning score. So basically, these are the 4 steps in how early warning score, whatever variation you're using, works. So it first compares the normal to, the measure to the normal range, generates a score, and then it identifies the risk and basically triggers a response to that risk. So as I told, so that's the first section of the talk where we introduced what is early warning score and how it is different from the TPR chart and how does it actually function through these 4 steps. Now the national warning score is what we most of the hospitals use. So it is a standardized system. It is called national because the whole of the NHS in the UK uses only this chart. So it's used all over the UK. So it's called the National Early Warning Score, and it is standardized. And basically, it's based on the 6 parameters and the level of consciousness, which I already alluded to. And it assigns a score according to the deviation from normal range and defines 4 risk categories. And actions are tailored to each specific category. So that's about the early warning score. And this is the close-up of the early warning score. If you see, it goes to the ABCDE system, the airway, breathing, circulation, disability, and exposure system. So we have the vital signs, the respiratory rate, the oxygen saturation, blood pressure, pulse rate, level of consciousness, and temperature. Along with that, we have the oxygen requirement also there, whether the patient was in air, how many liters the patient was in, and what device. Did they use Venturi or did they use a BiPAP? All this can be recorded in this. So this is basically the MEWS 2 chart. See, they started with the MEWS chart, and the MEWS 2 chart is the latest, where they have included 2 saturation scales for the type 2 respiratory failure, because the type 2 respiratory failure, as you know, have got a lower saturation, which is normal for them. So otherwise there could be confusion. So they also included the oxygen requirement. So slight modifications they have made. And the other peculiarity is they only take the systolic BP for the scoring. So that's also something which is peculiar. And as I said, the consciousness is by the ABPU scale. So the other point you have to see is the blood pressure normal range will be quite wide. We'll discuss about that in the table. So this is based on the 6 vital signs, and as you see, it is color coded. So if it is normal, it is white. Slightly abnormal, it is yellow, then orange, and then red. So it's color coded, and each of these colors have scores. As you can see here, the white is 0, the yellow is 1, orange is 2 and 3. So for each of the parameters, there are scores. So this is the basics of the MEWS chart. So the most important thing, especially the nurses who are trained to do this, the doctors still look at the trend. They're so used to use the TPR chart. So they look at the trend and they look at the individual measurements. But what we have to really look at is the total here. So at the bottom of the chart, all the totals or individual parameter scores are totaled for each and every reading. Okay, if it is 4th hourly, every 4th hourly you will have a total. And that is a total score which I think the doctors should learn to look at. So the total score will tell the level of risk. So we'll talk about that. So based on the total score, the nurses are empowered to change the monitoring. It's up to each hospital. So we do, actually, 8th hourly monitoring. If you're doing, then the nurses can make it either 6th hourly or 4th hourly or 2nd hourly based on the scores. And also if there's been any escalation of care. So they also will put yes or no in that. So that is something which we have to be aware about. Now, this is a very important table which explains how the early warning score works. So basically, you can see all the parameters which I told you are listed here. Okay, respiratory rate, saturation, air or oxygen, systolic blood pressure, pulse, consciousness, and temperatures. And here is the normal range. See, for example, respiration, the normal range is 12 to 20. Saturation, normal person, it's above 96. And this is for type 2 respiratory failure. It is 88 to 92. And like that, blood pressure. So this is what I wanted to talk about. The blood pressure, systolic blood pressure, the range is 111 to 219. So when we first introduced the MEWS chart, the physicians all got shocked. What is this you're talking? As a surgeon, you're coming and telling that 219 is normal BP. Now, the logic behind this is, what do you do when a person comes with a blood pressure of 180 by 110? You don't rush and start an IV and do all sorts of things like you will do for a hypoxia patient or a hypoglycemia patient. You'd probably admit them and give them a tablet, right? So here the early warning score is 1, it detects the risk, and also it detects what is our response. So because the risk is not much, so that is why the normal range is not actually the defined range. According to the early warning score, the normal range is 111 to 219, because only after that becomes urgent and something bad can happen. So that's a peculiarity, or 2 peculiarities of the early warning score, 2 saturation scales, one for this type 2 failure and one for the normal, and the systolic blood pressure has got a wide range. So this you have to be aware of. So then the scores are based on this. So yellow, if there is hypoxia, you get 1, 86 to 87, 84 to 85 is 2, less than 83, 3, like that. Okay. So if they started on oxygen, again the scores go up. So even on oxygen, if it is low, then the scores are going up. So likewise for all the other parameters, there are scores ranging from 1 to 3. Either it could be less or it could be more than the normal range. So based on these scores, there is a risk categories. So if the total score, this is why I said then the doctor should learn to look at the total score. If the aggregate score, the total score is 0 to 4, the clinical risk is low. And you don't need to do anything except, maybe, look at if it is 1, 3 or 4, then you can call the duty doctor and have a look at the patient. Ward-based response. Whereas if there is a red score, I told you the red is 3, score of 3 in any parameter, then it becomes a low medium clinical risk and it needs an urgent ward-based response. Here's a small asterisk, conditions apply, we used to say that. So here, the clinician whom is being called should have competence in the assessment and treatment of the acutely ill. Okay, you can't call the junior doctor who just joined yesterday after finishing MBBS. So this is something the early warning score very clearly emphasizes. That's one of the reasons I really like about it. It empowers the nurses to directly dial the senior most and most competent physician or surgeon who can come and see the patient. So it's urgent ward-based response rate score or an aggregate of 5 to 6. Also, it's the same thing. Okay, you got to call somebody who's really experienced and who's competent in assessing the patient. 7 or more is high risk and it immediately needs an urgent or emergency response. So either you can activate your medical emergency team, med team, if you have one, or you can transfer the patient to your IMCU or ICU to take closer care of your patient. So till this 3, the patient can be managed in the ward. But once the score reaches 7, then you definitely need to look at it and move them to a place where they can be monitored much more closely. So this is the 4 risk categories: low, medium, and high risk, which is being stratified according to the total score of the patient. So what is the purpose? So one, as I said, it allows early recognition of the signs of clinical deterioration. Because of the total score, we get overall, because as I said in the TPR, only looking at parameter by parameter. Here you can look at the total score, and then deciding the urgency. We saw that, was it going to be just in the ward and call the doctor, or are you going to shift the patient to a more intense area? So urgency of the response. Increasing the frequency of nursing attention. So if the score is low, risk is low, they can just continue the same level of monitoring, 6th hourly or whatever it's for your hospital. Whereas if the score becomes 3 or 4 or even medium, then they can increase the frequency of monitoring, making 2nd hourly. And if it is a medium or high risk, you probably plug them onto a multi-parameter monitor for a continuous monitoring. So the increasing frequency of nursing attention and the monitoring is also there. Place of management, I already told you, in the ward or to shift them to IMCU or ICU, depending on the scope. And finally, informing or activating a rapid response, either informing the doctor or activating your medical emergency team, not the crash team. The medical emergency team actually is before the code blue. So that is the purpose of early warning score. So the benefits are, it reduces code blue calls in the hospitals. Very, very important. Reduces the need for ICU care because they are detected early. Intervention happens early, and many of the patients actually don't go to the ICU. Decrease the length of hospital stay, again because of prompt treatment, and thereby lowering the healthcare costs. So these are very key benefits. And I think more and more hospitals should use these early warning score to make sure the patients get better outcomes. So what are the disadvantages? It is not universally suitable for all patient populations. We'll talk about it in a minute. And because definitely it is not that easy to implement. We went through a lot of challenges and barriers. I think every one of you who have implemented will sort of say yes to that. But it is worth it and does not substitute clinical judgment or communication. So, especially experienced nurses, will know that this patient is sick, even though the scores may be low. So it doesn't, you can't just then say, no, the score is low. So you have to respect the clinical judgment. And now a short, little bit of thing about what are the other modifications of the early warning score. We spoke in detail about the national early warning score. So what are the other modifications? And of these, which is the best? Because a paper has just come out last month it's really good to see which one of these is the best and then implement it in our hospital. So first is there are early warning score for different population groups. What we discussed till now is the one which can be used for the adults. Then you have a pediatric early warning score, PEWS, and then you have MEWS, which is the modified early obstetric warning score. So this is purely for pregnant ladies, and the other is for pediatrics. So these are for different population groups. In addition, there are other modifications like in addition to the national early warning score, we have the modified early warning score, that is MEWS, and the rapid acute physiological score, which is RAPS. the cardiac arrest triage, risk triage, that is CART, and finally rapid emergency medicine score, that is the REMS. So these are all modifications of the same vital parameters for different purposes and reasons. So let's quickly go through it. Modified early warning score is a simplified version of early warning score. So it only has respiratory rate, temperature, systolic blood pressure, and pulse rate. No oxygen saturation, no level of consciousness, and all that. So it's very simplified. You can probably start off, or in a not a very acute setting, you can probably use modified early warning score. But if you're seeing a lot of sick patients, then this may not be the system to use. So again, it's based on the deviation from normal range, and here it considers the Glasgow Coma Scale for assessing the level of consciousness. So here is a table, as I know. So 0 is a normal, and then 1, 2, 3 on either side. And this is a simplified version of the national early warning score. The rapid acute physiological score is used by intensivists, especially when they are being transported from one ICU to another. So it's something like GCS. So it's a one language intensivists can use, and it's a very simplified version of the Apache 2. So which has got a lot of parameters. So this is pretty simple to communicate. So again, 4 parameters: mean arterial pressure, heart rate, respiratory rate, and Glasgow Coma Scale. 0 to 4 and 0 to 16 is the total score, and higher the score, higher the risk of deterioration. So this again shows the RAPS. So these are the parameters, and 1, 0, 1, and 2 for the various parameters. So that's the RAPS, that is the for the ICU. Then this is the rapid emergency medicine score for the emergency departments. Non-surgical emergency, only for medical patients, because surgical cases are slightly different. So it's based on 6 physiological parameters. So here is the parameters, all the parameters, and the normal score and the deviation. Here it goes up to 4. So you can see there are a lot of variations among the various scoring systems. So that's the REMS. And finally, the cardiac arrest risk triage is used to predict cardiac arrest in hospitalized patients. So based on 6 physiological parameters, here it also includes urine output in addition to the other physiological parameters. And each parameter is assigned a score of 0 to 2, and the higher the score, higher the risk. So from 0 to 12. So that's about CART. Now coming to the most important question, which is the best, right? So here we have a paper which is recently published here in the Resuscitation Journal, a very recent publication, as you can see. And they did this ROC curve analysis of the various parameters. So you can see all this thing: MEWS, RAPS, REMS, and surgical early warning score is also there. I didn't include that. So they put all that and compared. They went through the previous case sheets in their hospital and applied the score to all the patients and saw which was predicting the seriousness or deterioration, and which predicted whether they will be admitted to the ICU. These are the 2 main questions they wanted to ask, and they found that MEWS was the most accurate predictor. So it had an area under the receptor operating curve of 0.9, which is pretty good. Confidence limit of 0.8 to 0.9, and MEWS value of 3 or higher forecasted ICU admission or death, with 74% sensitivity, 96% specificity, and positive predictive value of 14.5%. So MEWS 2 and MEWS were the same. So if you don't want to make your job difficult by having 2 saturation scales and all that, you can use a simplified MEWS. It still is pretty good in predicting patient deterioration. So that's very important thing to know. But be careful that this is only one publication in one hospital. So you need to also take it with a pinch of salt. And last part of my talk is how to implement early warning score. Here, we have implemented it for more than 2 years, so I think I can talk a little bit about it. So the first thing is to start a pilot in a very small area and in a friendly area. That's very, very important. So we had a small ward which had only about few beds. And friendly meaning both the nursing and the clinicians who are taking part should be friendly with you, because otherwise there'll be a lot of problems. I had running battles with physicians in the corridor. They all thought me that I am the villain, trying to change the whole system. So better to start small, better to test, know how things are working, and then expand. Okay, so once you, in the pilot phase itself, you need to keep adapting, because when you do it first, you may not get it right. So get feedback from the nurses, get feedback from the doctors, and especially the junior doctors, and then you adapt it to your hospital. For example, our physicians are very much against the BP being so high, 219. They wanted to say at least, okay, let's make it 180. So we sort of titrated that. And the frequency of monitoring was also something which we were discussing about. So small adjustments you can make and make sure that everybody is on the same page. So, but you should not change the core elements of the national warning score. Very, very important. So keep the core elements. Don't completely change the parameters and all that. But within that, you can make minor modifications to suit your local environment. Then, very, very important is the education and training. So we did an extensive training of all the nurses, even before we took it out of pilot. So the whole went through training, and all the doctors were also trained, and this is also become part of the induction course for both the nurses and doctors. So because not many hospitals are doing it, and when the new nurses or new doctors join a hospital, then they need to know about it. So it is very important that everybody is familiar with the whole system. So that's about education and training. And standardization is very, very important. So you should use the same chart. So don't modify it for surgical ward, neurology ward, just because the consultants are saying, no, I want this and want that. No, it has to be standardized. It has to be just those 6 physiological parameters in the same format. And if possible, try to standardize the equipment with which they are using. Don't use digital in one ward, especially sphingomanometer, the old one in another ward. Standardize the equipment and the techniques for taking measurements also. Very, very important. And as I said, the most important is engaging the doctors. So that is something which we found was the challenge in our hospital. So right from the head of the departments, right up to the junior doctors, you need to discuss with them, tell them what you're doing initially, and also periodically, you audit the system and give them the feedback saying that this is actually working, and this is the patients whom we were able to detect early, move them to the ICU, and thereby we didn't call the code blue team. This sort of thing can be discussed in the staff meeting and all that, to make the clinicians understand that this system actually works. So very important. And finally, you need to have clear protocols for responding to emergency alerts. I told you, this scoring. So what are the mechanisms? So now peculiarly, there are several consultants who will say, I don't need to be disturbed between 2 to 4 in the afternoon. That is my nap time. Or morning 5 to 6, where I am doing my, yoga, or things like that. Okay. So all this needs to be discussed. So you need to have protocols. Now the nurses needs to be empowered to call if the score is red or high. They have to bypass the junior doctors and directly call the consultants or the intensivists. So if the primary doctor is not willing to be disturbed, then at least you should get the permission from the primary doctor to call the intensivist in house, so that the early care by a experienced person is given to these patients. So it's very important to sort all these things out. So clear protocols written down, and this should be told to all the junior doctors as well. So they should not get offended that they have been bypassed. So once you're clear about all these things, then you spread to the other areas. This happens pretty quick. Once you ironed out all the problems and the early teething problems, then you are ready. So and the nurses and doctors are also trained. Quickly you can spread it to the other areas. And another important thing you have to remember is, if you have EMR, then this needs to be incorporated, and you need to be careful how they write the code, because we found problems in the actual scores after the software is developed. So you need to make sure you test them, make sure the scores are coming out right in the automated system. Very, very important to do that. And last but not the least, important to keep auditing and providing the feedback. I already told you. It's very important to do that so that people understand, yes, the system is working. This is actually better than our previous system. And important again to have support from the leadership. So not only the management, but every department head, clinical department head, ward in charge, nurses, nursing supervisors, and all these people should have the ownership and should be champions of this. Then only the system will work. So the support from leadership is very, very important. So the challenges I already pointed out. So let's just briefly, quickly put it through. Lack of awareness and knowledge is the most important one, and that actually because of lack of training and education. So that can be corrected. Lack of trust and confidence, always it starts with that, because any new change people don't believe, because of something what we've been using for centuries, the TPR chart. So if you want to change it, then there is a lot of mistrust and lack of confidence, but it is up to us to prove that it works. And lack of feedback and evaluation. So this trust and confidence can be built by providing active feedback and effectiveness of the system. And lack of support, I already alluded to. These are all human problems. System problems of lack of standardization and consistency. As I told you, every ward and every department should have the same systems, and integration into the various early warning systems and communication and IT. And there may be always genuine lack of resources, which can be barriers to the implementation of the system. So friends, I think that's what I wanted to say about the early warning score. In summary, the early warning score determines the degree of a patient's illness based on vital signs. It's a very simple system. There's nothing high-tech about it, except you have to print the chart in color. And nowadays, printing in color has also become cheap. So otherwise, it's just a simple system based on vital signs. It generates a total score. We call it composite because it involves all the parameters, and it reflects the risk of deterioration. And this allows us to initiate early intervention and manage the patient, thereby prevent cardiac arrest, code blue calls, admission to the ICU. And it has been implemented. It's not nothing new I'm talking about. At least 34 countries is implemented. India is implemented, as you saw in my poll. A lot of people have already started using this. And National Early Warning Score of the NHS is the most widely used early warning system, and justifiably so, because studies are now proving that it predicts accurately the ICU admissions and death. So, if it's something which you want to use, start using the National Early Warning Score, that is used by the NHS, and it is open. You can use it. It's available, online. As I told you, there are several other modifications used for specific purposes. One is the pediatric obstetric, another is the RAPS, REMS, and CART for emergency ICU and cardiac arrest prediction. And finally, implementing is a challenge, but I think it's worth the effort because of all the positive outcomes it can bring through. So with that, now I end this small update on early warning score. Again, thank you so much, all of you. I'm really, really grateful that you people take your time and come and listen to me. I'm so grateful for that. Thank you so much.